Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're getting back into the Miles Morales clone saga with part 2. And I'll admit, like, so far it's holding up. And I mean, we still got some time to see if it's gonna stick the landing, but from what I've seen so far, it's building into something pretty solid. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping right back into the Miles Morales clone saga, we pick up right where we left off. Because for Miles, after being anxious to catch this clone, which causes him to chase his guy down and lose track of Peter, but it then leads him to 2 other clones, to where then between the 3 of these clones, they kind of got this brotherhood, like I'm my brother's copy's keeper thing going on. Like they're all real close. But with meeting them, the first one tells Miles that his name is Salim, which is Arabic for undamaged, which makes more sense than what I was thinking before. But when Miles gets here, Salim tells him that him and his brothers are like Miles, but better. And with Salim saying this, like, it kind of introduces us to the idea that not only are these guys just clones of Miles, but then on top of that, there's also something a bit extra. Like Salim, who's highly intelligent, he's fluent in 7 different languages, like German and Cantonese, and he tells Miles that he knows enough Spanish to tell him that his is embarrassing. But with seeing Salim here, Miles initially believes that he's the same clone that Miles had ran into, who had attacked him at his home, and Miles had later found out that he was created by the Assessor, who had kidnapped Miles and harvested his DNA, along with putting Miles through a number of tests in order to produce that clone. But back at the time, like we had learned through his uncle Aaron, that clone was quote unquote a burner, and it had a clock to where it would just stop working. So for that reason, its lifespan was super short. It was something like 24 hours. And after that, it would just go like back to formula or whatever. But when Miles mentions this, like Salim doesn't even acknowledge that. But instead he tells Miles that he knew that Miles would try to stop them, and that this one time he's given Miles a warning to stay out of their way. But Miles finds that pretty hard to do because for one, he doesn't even know what they're doing. Like what's their goal? But what he does know is that whatever they are doing, it involves hurting people. And for Miles, with knowing that alone, it's enough for him to know that these guys need to be stopped. But it's then while Miles is trying to talk this through with Salim, when the clay-face big glurping one, he then gets in Miles's face, and it's here we find out that his name is Shift, which more or less goes hand in hand with the way that he shifts his body mass to kind of get big and knock things around. So unfortunately his name isn't Spider Glurp like some of you guys were saying in the comments for the last one, but have no fear because we still get some good names coming up. But as Salim starts to leave with the others, Miles kind of puts his hand on the shoulder, more or less so they can talk things through, and that is more than enough to get him jumped. And initially when I seen this, like I was like, man, that's pretty extreme, man, like whoa. But as we go forward, I think it begins to make more sense as far as why they can't let Miles get in their way, and we'll talk about more of that in a little bit. But as far as right now, like while they're beating the mess out of Miles, Salim tells him like, you should have just left us alone, there are 3 of us and you do not have any brothers, which of course is when Peter comes through and he swings through with a one-liner like, that's where you're wrong. And when I see this, like it makes me think, like you ever think about like the times where people come through like right on time, like in moments just like this with Peter? Because in moments like this, I think of Peter just sitting on top of the building, just kind of watching Miles get beat up, and while he's up there watching, he's kind of thinking like, okay, what's a good line for me to jump in on? And like the whole time he's just up there watching, like, what'd he say, his name's Salim? Nah, I ain't got nothing for that, let me stay a little bit longer. And like he's just sitting up there for a good 10 minutes just waiting for a good entrance, or just a good line to use whenever he decides to make his entrance. Like I think a lot of heroes just have that as like a habit, like you can't just show up and help because that's boring. But even with that said, I gotta give Peter his props, because when he sees Miles's clone and he asks him like, who are you, Kilometers Morales? Like that, okay, that one has some creativity on it. Kilometers Morales, okay, like you got one there. But then here's the thing, because when Peter shows up, this fight between all of them, it doesn't last too long, because the last one, who we didn't really talk about, his name is Mind Spinner, and when he steps in, he hits Peter and Miles with a telepathic attack that's strong enough to knock the 2 of them out and allow all 3 of the clones to just get away. And when this happens, it comes as a surprise, because this guy, he didn't get like the introduction or the powers explanation, and really the only hint that we got about like as far as what he's capable of, it had really just come by the way of Miles having a headache once he arrived on this rooftop and he was just initially attacked by these 3 clones. But when this happens, like Peter and Miles, they're knocked out for like minutes, like a good minute, like a hot minute, like they sleep. And when they finally get up, they then try to go around and look for these guys, and when they do, Peter suggests that they both split up so they can cover more ground, but Miles is like, nah, that's what they do in the horror movies. And because of that, they're both like, you know what, we're gonna stick together, and they actually do stick together. But even with them sticking together and searching, they still come up with nothing. And with that being the case, Miles insists that he has to find these guys because the whole stealing his identity and giving him a bad rep, like, he finds it very unsettling, which is the main reason why he wants it to end as quickly as possible. And it's because of that he tells Peter that he wants to keep looking like non-stop until he finds these guys, but then Peter kind of has to pull him back in and let Miles know, like, if he does that, for one, like, just going non-stop searching for these guys, like, something else you need to be doing is gonna get neglected, because at this point it's not even like you have a lead to know like where they went or even where they might be. And with the city being just as huge as it is, there's too many possibilities of where they could be. So for Miles to try and do this non-stop search day and night, like, the idea is just not practical, like, it's not gonna do any good. And it's here where Peter lets him know that sometimes you just gotta wait for the other guy to make his move, and whatever that move may be, you're just more likely to find your opportunity then. And when Peter says this, I feel like it's something that Miles could really learn from, like, from just seeing this entire series so far. And granted, even though it's been a lot of stuff that's been just happening to Miles, between school, the assessor, Frost, Pharaoh, I think his name was, and like the dude who was like just hypnotizing kids and turning them into villains, like, that was just weird. But through like 90% of this series, Miles has just been going non-stop. And I feel like if you were to come around and find the balance, like even with school and everything right now, then that would help him in a huge way. But much like Peter said, he had learned that with experience, like over time, Miles will eventually get that too. And sure, Miles has plenty of experience since the 1610, but when you hold that in comparison to Peter, I'm sure Miles is still a good 500 issues behind, at least. But while they're having this conversation here, Miles then remembers that he has an essay that he's got to turn in by tomorrow because his English teacher had picked him to apply for a scholarship. So from here, he takes off to get that done, and he promises Peter that he'll reach out to him if anything pops up with this whole clone debacle. And from there, as Peter goes his way, he starts singing The Greatest Love of All because he believes the children are the future. Give them a sense of pride. But after this, when Miles gets back to Genki, and he's ready to tell Genki about the craziness that he's just seen, but when he gets back, Genki's all the way in the corner talking about, come on, break my jaw, tough guy. And it's a little weird because when Miles left, they had kind of cooled down the tension. But then it's here where Genki shows Miles text that Barbara claims that Miles had sent her, which show Miles going off about her dating Genki. But here, Miles tells Genki that that wasn't him, and he didn't send any of those messages. And almost immediately, Genki realizes that, okay, like, this is Attack of the Clones. And with Salim sending these messages pretending to be Miles, he's essentially just throwing a monkey wrench into Miles' life and doing it whether out of animosity or just to plain and simple keep Miles out of the way. But with Salim doing this, Genki tells Miles that he can trace back Salim's phone and figure out his location either by GPS or cell tower or one of them things. But even with doing this, it's gonna take a while. But Miles, he doesn't mind because he's got a paper to write anyway. But to me, like, the funny thing with Salim pulling like the fake number or acting like he's calling from Miles's phone kind of trick, it kind of reminds me of a prank that someone pulled on me back around like 2008, 2009 when my homegirl used an app, like an Android app, to call my phone pretending to be my ex, who had also recently been married. But my homegirl called my phone pretending to be my ex, and when I picked up, she was whispering, and when she called, she just said, "I made a mistake." But then she just busted out laughing, and I knew who it was after that. But the moral of the story, I guess, is just be careful even when you see the name on the phone, because you never know who it could be. Could be a clone. But with Genki doing his thing to track down Salim, this is practically the move that Miles is waiting for Salim to make. But while Miles is waiting, he goes to get a soda out of the fridge, which Genki thinks is pretty weird because Miles doesn't drink soda. But it's here where he tells Genki that he needs the sugar, like he needs the energy, so that he can get to writing this essay. And from there, we do get a bit of a glimpse of him writing this essay, or at least him starting it. And as far as the topic for the essay, the question is what makes you unique? And it's an interesting topic to be writing on, like in the middle of your own clone saga. But what I find to be even more interesting is the perspective that Miles approaches the essay with, to where on the surface there are a bunch of things you could say about Miles Morales that are unique, whether you're talking about him being Miles or you're talking about him being Spider-Man, which within this essay he just refers to as his quote unquote extracurricular activities. But even when he focuses on that, like the Spider-Man side, it's like he thinks of it again and he says that he's not really sure if he is unique. Because you could say that, hey, he's a teenage hero, but there are others like Kamala, or because he was bit by a radioactive spider just like Peter, or because both him and Captain America are from Brooklyn. And I mean Brooklyn from another world, but still Brooklyn. But with Miles trying to write this essay, you can tell that there's some things that he's still trying to figure out about himself. But with Genki doing his thing, he finds a location and he just texts it to Miles. But even with doing this, he's concerned because Miles just hasn't gotten any sleep. But when Miles arrives at the location that he was given by Genki, like when he makes his way in, none of the clones are there, but when he takes a look around, he sees much of their equipment, and while he looks through it, he sees some sort of serum with a bunch of equipment and like rotating mixers, and he just trashes everything, because from just looking at the setup, it looks like they're trying to make more clones. But as soon as Miles trashes the place, Salim and the others get back, and it's here where we then find out that this whole makeshift lab setup, that it was actually Salim trying to put together a cure for him and his brothers to find a way to keep them alive, because much like the clone who Miles had ran into before, these guys also have an expiration date. And when this happens here, it's not really clear if they have like 24 hours like the other clone that Miles had seen, but they do make it pretty clear that they don't have that much longer. And because Miles had just came in here and just destroyed their lab, Salim tells him that he had pretty much just given him and his brothers a death sentence. And because of that, he's gonna make sure that when they start to die, that Miles is also gonna go along with them. And in the meantime, while they're waiting, Mind Spinner is gonna make sure that the remaining time that Miles has, that every last bit of it is a living hell. And so now real quick, I wanna give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.